In this lecture, we're going to see how we can use the subscript operator to not only read data from our point object, but be also able to change the values in our member variables. And what we want to do is basically something like this. We have our point object. It is nothing special. We have our values for our member variables. We're going to print information. We're going to see these guys printed down. We can use the subscript operator like we did in the last lecture to read data. The first line here is going to print the x coordinate. The second line here is going to print the y coordinate. Leaving at index 1 in our class. This is the setup we did in the last lecture. But we don't only want to be able to do this. We also want to be able to go through our subscript operator and modify the data we have in our coordinates. For example, we can go through the syntax here through index 0 and modify the x coordinate, or go through the syntax we see online using the subscript 1 here to change the data we have in our y coordinate. And we want this to work. For this to work, we want to change our operator, or to be specific, our subscript operator, to return a reference. And the syntax is going to change slightly. You see that we are returning a reference. And what this is going to do, it's going to return a true reference that we can use now to modify our member variables here. And notice that the function is no longer const, because now we have the ability to modify the member variables through the returned reference here. So if we try to make this a const member function, this is not going to allow us to modify anything about the member variables of this object, and we're going to get a compiler error. You should be aware of this. Now that you know this, we're going to head over to Visual Studio Code and play with this a little more. Okay, so here we are in our working folder. The current project is subscript operator for reading and writing. We're going to grab the code from the last lecture because we're going to be changing that slightly. We don't want to start from scratch. And we're going to open this up in Visual Studio Code by dragging and dropping here. And we don't only want to be able to use the subscript operator to read stuff from our point object, we also want to be able to modify data about our point object. So for example, the first set of lines here are going to print the data we have in our point object here, but we also want to do something like this. We want to be able to go through our subscripts and modify, for example, the x coordinate to 35.6, why not? And we want to go through this to modify our y coordinates through index 1 and change the data to be 23.9. Why not? So we want to be able to do something like this. And if we print information, we're going to get the data changed by the statements here. So we're going to be specific and say that we are changing the data. And if we copy what we have on top here and put that below, we're going to see the changed data. We want to be able to support this. But if you try to do something like this, as of now, again, the code we have is from the last lecture, and we have our operator here. We're going to try and run this. You're going to see that this is going to run, but it is not going to do what you expect. And it is not even going to run. Okay, so one thing you should know is that because we don't have this operator with the ability to modify data, the syntax here is really not going to work. If we try and build this program, we're going to see that we're going to get a compiler error. And the compiler error is going to say, okay, now I realize that we don't have a point declared in our program here. So we're going to say P1. That's what we should say. P1 and modify through the indexes. And if we try and build this program, you're going to see that we're going to get a compiler error. And it's going to say that we can't really do this. The return value from our subscript operator can't be written into using the syntax we are using here because that's not supported. It's going to give us a compiler error. We don't really have enough information to understand this. We are going to understand this in a later chapter when we have learned about move semantics. But for now, note that this is not going to work with the subscript operator we have in our point class. And the fix is ridiculously easy. All you have to do to make this work is to change and return a reference. And the ability this is going to give you is to be able to go through this reference and modify the member variables of our class here. But notice that the moment we return a reference, we're going to get squiggly lines here. And what this is saying is that we can't go through these references and modify the data in our member variables. And we can't do this because this member function is flagged as a const. It is a const member function. And for this to work, we have to take out this const keyword here. And if we do this, you're going to see that this is going to work just fine. So let's try and build again. We're going to build with GCC. You're going to see that our problems are going to go away and the build is really cool here. We're going to clear and run rooster. And now you see that if we print the data first, we're going to get 10 and 20 printed out. That's what we see here. And after that, we're going to change the data to what we see here. The x coordinate is going to be changed to 35.6. The y coordinate is going to be changed to 23.9. And that's what we see down here. And we were effective in our changing of our member variables through the subscript operator. And this is something you might do if it makes sense for your program. My job here is to make you aware of these possibilities. And if you want to go through the subscript operator to modify the member variables, the data you have inside, the trick is to return by reference in your subscript operator. And this is going to just work. So to make the code here a little bit cleaner, what we can do is say p1 printful, and this is going to print the information. And we can go down and take this out because in this lecture, we're really not interested in reading through the subscript operator. What we want is to be able to apply modifications through the subscript operator. So we're going to print information after we do the change, and we're going to build again. To take these changes in effect, we're going to clear and run rooster. And for the first print, we're going to have 10 and 20. For the second print, we're going to have the data that we just put in on line 12 and 13 here. And this is what we see in our output. Another thing I want to really fix is to not use the if statement here. It is really lengthy. We can use a ternary operator as we saw on the slides. And let's comment this out first because I want you to see this as a reference. And what we're going to do is say return. And we're going to say index equals 0. And if index is 0, we're going to return mx. Otherwise, we're going to return my. And if we put in a syntax like this, you're going to see that it is going to work. We're going to try and build before we take out what we had done before. So the build is good. We can clear and run rooster. And you're going to see that this is what we expect. And if we pass in an index that our operator doesn't expect, for example, we put in 100, why not? If we try and build, the build is going to be good. But if we try and run the program and our code is executed, we're going to get an assertion. And that's going to bring us to the point where we put offending code in our program. And you're going to see that assertion has failed in our program. This is going to crash the program. And it's going to tell exactly at which line in our code we are offending the rules that we have to follow in our subscript operator. If we go to line 16 in our point header file, we're going to see that this is the line that is offending. We have an assertion failure here, and we're going to hunt for the code that caused for this to be called, and we're going to come back to the line 13 here in the main function, and you're going to fix this. So for example, we can change this back to a 1. And if we build now, the problem is going to go away. And if we run rooster, we're going to see that this is going to work just fine. And this is really all I had to share in this lecture, showing you that you can change your subscript a little bit and give it the superpowers to be able to allow you to modify the data about your object through subscript operators like this. And this is really cool. We are going to stop here in this lecture. In the next one, we're going to show you how you can use a subscript operator in collection types. And that's a much more common use for subscript operators. So go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.